Hi, thanks for joining us tonight. This is Tommy Cold, Glasgow Radio Online. It's 18 minutes past 6, and this is the Internet Bampot Radio Show. We're bringing you a live interview, an interview I recorded last week with Mr. David Lowe. He was part of the Rebels who won control of Celtic Park back in 1994, along with good people like Fergus, McCann, Brian Dempsey, Matt McGlone, and various others. We've got an hour and 24 minutes, 25 seconds of the good brother. I'll post on my Twitter late during the show the good brother's Twitter account. And without further ado, we'll play it in just 2 seconds, 2 minutes. Give me 1 minute, we'll get it loaded.
But as far as I'm concerned, the first thing you can do for me is to chuck all your medals and all your caps and all your pots and all your pans into the biggest flipping dustbin you can find. Because you've never won any of them fairly. You've done it all by blooming cheating.
But you'll have to forgive me, as I've been listening to Rangers fans singing how they'd like to wade up to their knees in my blood over the last 50 years. So, ha ha, Rangers, ha ha ha. But
that's the bottom line. The big house must stay open.
Get shut down. So this is how Celtic managed to stay open, and let's get this going. The show on the road. Retweet if you can. Tell 10 to tell 10. Tommy Gold, Glasgow Radio Online. This week we're taking on Radio Snide. Turn off Radio Clyde. If you know anybody's got it, tell me. Turn it off. Tune in here. Listen to all the big interviews. Tomorrow we're bringing you an interview with Matt McGlone. Tomorrow, 6:15, Matt McGlone. Anyway, without further ado, here's today's interview. David Lowe. And thanks for joining me today. We've got a special guest, David Lowe. Hello.
Hi there.
And David, you were part of the Celtic takeover way back in '94 with Fergus McCann.
That's correct, yep. 1992 to 1994, yep.
And what's your position? Are you a financial advisor? What's your role currently?
Well, I was more involved at the time in sort of putting the plan together. I mean, it wasn't an easy thing to do. It was a private company. It was controlled by three families: the Whites, the Grants, and the Kellys. Everybody said it couldn't get done, but Celtic was such a parlous, precarious state that I did a wee bit of research into it. I'm an investment analyst to trade, and I basically discovered that nobody actually controlled this club, and if you went about buying up shares here and there, you could get into a very influential position, exert some pressure, and take it over. Then start doing good things with it, addressing the problems of the day. I mean, a lot of people forget that the Taylor report required all football stadiums to have all seats. Celtic didn't have that. They had 8,000 seats in the main stand. They had no money to refurb the stadium, to rebuild the team. They were falling further and further behind Rangers. They hadn't even finished the top two of the league for 3 or 4 seasons, if my memory serves me correct. They were in a mess, and I thought I could do something about it. So that's how I get involved. But, some people have said, well, have you always been a Celtic supporter? And the answer is yes. I've been watching Celtic since 1966. One of my first games was at Fir Park when we won the first of the 9. Celtic fans, I remember, as an 8-year-old, were dancing on the roof when you can get away with these things. And it's been great fun ever since, more often than not. So, there you go.
Yeah, so your early age, that was your first game was in '66, you said there, yeah?
Yeah, if my memory serves me correct, it's the first memorable one, certainly, because I remember it was an away game. We hadn't won the league since the 1950s, and father took me to Fir Park, and if my memory is correct, we won. But I do remember fans dancing on the roof of the stand. So that's the one that sticks in my mind. It's possible I might have been to an early one, I also remember, beating Liverpool 1-0 in the semi-final of the Cup Winners' Cup, and losing 2-0 at Anfield, and Bobby Lennox having a perfectly legitimate goal ruled out, which would have put us through. But these are sort of my first memories of Celtic. So I've been watching them ever since.
So you came into Celtic at the time when it was obviously the most successful period, and you saw the great achievements and a lot of youngsters. Myself, I was born in 72.
That's exactly why it was so distressing, if you like, to see the situation that Celtic were in the early 90s. Because if you're my age in your early 50s, or 54 to be precise, you've grown up with all that success.
Yes.
The glory years. And I was actually, as a young guy, I expected Celtic to get to the European Cup final every year right up to about 1975. Because that's what I was used to. Semi-finals in Europe and finals in Europe.
Yeah, I agree.
So I just couldn't stand being the fourth best team in Scotland in the early 90s. And knowing that it was only going to get worse. So I actually decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to do something about this. And that's how I got involved.
So, for myself, I only knew the tail end of Jock Stein. It was still a nipper, but even then, Rangers weren't the successful force that they became. And we all know through the cheating. So from 86 onwards, when Souness came along and then Murray. So when you seen this happening, obviously for your personal side, when it's on 86, just taking it for yourself, David, because I want to do it at a personal level and obviously for you at a level, where were you in 86? What was your involvement then? Where were you at?
No, I was a fan. I've always been a fan. I've never sort of mixed with the cognoscenti. I've always just gone with my friends to the game, and I still just go with my regular friends to the game. But I do remember in 1986, Graham Souness coming in, and he was a big Scotland star, a big Liverpool star. And Rangers at the time were the fourth best team in Scotland. They were in a really bad way. And I remember the guy that, the big shareholder in America, Lawrence Marlborough, I think his name was, if my memory serves me correct.
Right, yeah.
Come in and threw all these guys out and installed Graham Souness in. And Souness, because a whole lot of English teams were banned, or all the English teams were banned from playing in Europe.
Because of the Heysel, yeah.
Because of Heysel, he sort of signed Butcher and all the other guys.
Yeah.
And that really sort of changed the face of Scottish football. But
that was a key point, wasn't it?
I do remember, this has never really been spoken about. Rangers, after 2 years under David Holmes, who was installed as managing director, were in a very, very bad financial situation because they'd borrowed a lot of money. A lot of money in those days would have been like £6 million. And David Murray actually came in 2 years later, 1988, as the Rangers' saviour. He took over the debt. Then from that moment on, he just started spending.
Can I ask you a question on that one just now, David?
Through borrowings.
Can I ask you a question on David Holmes? I've read somewhere, I don't know if it's a speculation or a bit of internet bam pottery, but David Holmes, was he working for David Murray, or was he a plant for David Murray at the time prior to him getting there? No, I
don't believe there was any
just
prior
the
connection
debt
between
for the
David Murray. Lawrence Holmes from memory was a house builder, and the Marlborough family I think were house builders. That was, they just decided Rangers were so bad, the fourth best team in Scotland, that there had to be a change, and they threw out the old board. I think the chairman was called Ray Simpson, if my memory is correct, and they installed Holmes, but they eventually ran out of money within 2 years. Right. And that's when the merchant bank, Noble Grosser, got involved, and they had close connections with David Murray, and I think David Murray is on record as saying he was about to buy Ayr United, and they got a call that Rangers were available, and obviously he bought Rangers instead of Ayr United. And that's really when Scottish football changed completely. Because here's another interesting statistic. Up to that point, Scottish football basically lived within its means. Nobody really had any bank debt at all. In fact, I remember that Celtic had a debt of £15,000 in 1987. That's what their overdraft was. They had never borrowed any money. And Celtic actually went into debt for the very first time in 1988. centenary year when they built the front of the main stand.
Correct, yeah.
And they went into about £2.5 million worth of debt.
Wow.
And then they didn't really have any real talent on the board. Now, David Murray, you criticise him as much as you want. He is an entrepreneur. He is a risk taker, and he changed the face of Scottish football. Admittedly, we've now found out for the worse, but nobody thought that at the time. So he had certain talents. Celtic, unfortunately, didn't have any boardroom talent, and they tried to copy him. So we got our own green Souness in the shape of Liam Brady, you know, and we got an overdraft facility as well, and we went out and bought players that we couldn't really afford, but we didn't have the borrowing capability or the talent to manage it as well, and it didn't work out. And within 3 years, we had an unsustainable amount of debt. We had the Taylor report and the stadium requirements looming, and a very poor team. We weren't even finishing second in the league. And that's when I came back to Glasgow in 1991. I had a look at all this and said, we're in danger of going bust here. We better do something about this. And that's when I got involved.
And at the time when you got involved, who was Fergus McCann, how did he come into it, if you don't mind me asking that? And the whole thing is surrounding it from that time. How did it all get together? How did all the key people, Matt McGlone and others, how did you all join forces, if you like? Myself, I was away, and all the youngsters out there, we want to know everything about this time because it's key. We want to, we've laughed and enjoyed how Rangers have failed, and this is spectacular how this was done for Celtic fans with no social media, no way of getting together. How did you get together? How did you get it on? Because brilliant work, David. Carry on, sorry.
Okay. Right, so you got to remember, I'm just an ordinary fan, but I've got two main interests in life, more than two, but the two that are relevant here are basically I'm an investment analyst in trade, so I can look at balance sheets, accounts, and I'm an investment strategist. I can come up with plans. So if you marry those attributes to the fact that I'm a mad Celtic fan, with a very keen interest in making sure that Celtic are as good as they can be, that got me motivated to get involved. Now, around the same time, I'm not the only guy that worked out. We were in a bad spot, but nobody. There was a disparate bunch of people that didn't really know each other. Now, Fergus McCann, I didn't know Fergus at the time. He'd already worked out that Celtic were in a bad spot, had made various different proposals to them, the board, which they had all knocked back. Because what very, very quickly became apparent whenever you approached the Celtic board is that the most important thing as far as they were concerned was preserving their status as the people who controlled Celtic, and that was above any requirement to, quite frankly, do what was best for Celtic. So they would knock back something that was best for Celtic if it meant that they had to get pushed aside. So Fergus experienced that in his own way. I wasn't involved. I experienced that, when I was speaking to various board members separately at the time. And some of you younger folk might not remember that the Celtic board actually recognised this problem as well. And a faction on the board appointed Brian Dempsey as the director. But the other faction on the board, the one that wants to keep control, which is basically the Whites and the Kellys, brought on Michael Kelly, and within a year they'd get rid of Dempsey. So he was floating about at the time. Then there was a bunch of other people floating about. But Celtic's a small world, and everybody finds out pretty quickly what everybody else is up to. And yes, there wasn't any social media, but very soon everybody started talking to each other and saying, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about this? And there was a series of meetings. And at one of these meetings, that's when I said, well, I have a cunning plan.
Well done, Baldrick. Well done.
And
it was Baldrick that saved us
if you follow this cunning plan, there's a good chance that it will succeed. So everybody agreed to this plan, and this plan involved buying up Celtic shares on the QT, so that we ended up with a very meaningful shareholding, and then going to the board with this meeting and shareholding. Remember, a shareholding means you own part of the club, so they can't ignore you. So within a matter of months, in 1992, we built up, quite a big shareholding without the board knowing about it. And then
when you say, can you quantify how much that was, David?
What?
Can you quantify how much it was, roughly?
From memory, it got as high as 40%.
Really? Right, okay.
Yeah, but it still wasn't 51%. But, and this involved, picking up shares all over the place, some in the States, some in Ireland, some in Canada, and a small shareholding in a farm in South Fermanagh. So but every time you bought a share, you had to tell the person you were speaking to the story. So there was always the risk that you were speaking to somebody who was a shareholder who was loyal to the board, and that's exactly what happened. We ended up speaking to a shareholder in Glasgow. He pretended he was really interested in what we were doing, which was trying to take over Celtic, put a whole lot of money into it, build a stadium and start taking it forward. And he went and told the board. The board were alerted, and we ended up having a fight with the board which lasted 2 years.
And
it didn't have to have lasted 2 years. If they'd actually agreed, they wanted our money and they wanted Fergus McCann to run the business, this could have been over, in 3 months. But they didn't want us, and they fought us for a couple of years.
So when you built up the 40% of the shares, was that done over a short period of time? You said with different countries, America, Ireland.
Yeah, that was all done in 3 months.
And that was in 92, sorry?
That involved picking up a big shareholding in Canada, a big shareholding in Ireland, getting the support of Betty Devlin, the wife of the late Tom Devlin, who was the Celtic chairman in the 1970s. Then we got shares from the McGrory family, who supported us. Jimmy McGrory's family supported us. We got shares from Patsy Gallagher's family, they supported us. And we added all this up. We had either ownership or control of 40% of Celtic. But you needed 51% to change things, and the old families all stuck together against us until eventually, 2 years later, Kevin Kelly and Tom Grant saw sense and ended up supporting us.
And was that the key? Were those the two that finally sold that enabled the triple point? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we were gaily, going about, putting proposals together, offering them money. They were knocking it back, and it was all getting very tired. It looked as if we weren't going anywhere, and that's, at some point along that 2 years stretch, I ended up speaking to Matt McGlowan, and then he put together the Celts for Change movement, which was a street movement. So if you like, I was running the financial arm of the movement, if you like, and he was running the street fan arm of the movement, and together these two different movements, exerted pressure on the board, which eventually meant that we took control in March 1994.
And all this time, the bold Fergus, the bunnet, where was he at this time then, David? Was he sitting beside you? Was he alongside?
No, well, he was in Canada, and he would come over occasionally, but he was adamant, to use the Fergus voice. I'm not giving them one thin dime. Every dollar I've got is going into the club. They're getting nothing. That was always his mantra, right up to the very end. So, and I have to say, he was the only one. There's a whole lot of talkers. You see a whole lot of talkers at Rangers just now. People talking about how they love Rangers, people talking about how they'll put money into Rangers. Well, none of them have really put any money into Rangers. It's taken a Yorkshireman and two stockbrokers from Manchester to pony up the money. Celtic was a bit similar, all the usual. So with one exception, I might add John Keane. The only guy that was prepared to pony up the money to get Celtic on the road to recovery was Fergus McCann. And the only local guy was John Keane. Most of the other guys didn't talked a good game, but didn't come up with anything.
Right.
So Fergus was always consistent from day one to the end. He was consistent when he said, I'll put the money in, but I want control. When we got control, he put the money in. When he got control and put the money in, he said, I'm going to build a stadium, which he did. He said he was going to leave after 5 years, which he did. He said he was going to offer his shares to the fans, which he did. he's one of the few people in life who actually is as good as their word. And people that are as good as their word have to be respected, not booed.
Agreed. The thing was, some of the stuff, right? So myself, I'll put my cards on the table now, David. I was the one, or part of people who booed him at the time when we unveiled the league flag, which had stopped Rangers winning the 10, for anybody that didn't see that. So you have to understand, for a huge element of the Celtic support, I mean, at the time, when I went to that game that day, when we won the league, I just found out that my youngest daughter was going to be born that day, and it was a huge celebration. I remember being down Bears that night in the Gallagate, and I wanted it. And that night before it, I said, I don't want us to win it to stop them. I just want to win it to see it for myself, because the last time I seen it, I was a 16-year-old boy in the centenary. So I was just desperate. But, so fast forward a couple of months, went to the same stadium, and me and other Celtic fans whistled and booed and jeered Fergus, a guy who had brought us this fine stadium, who had brought us all, but what we had seen, right, as fans, and I have to admit, I've softened now, and seeing what has happened to Rangers now, and what happened then, I've admired Fergus a huge lot more, but at the time, my thoughts and opinions, admittedly swayed perhaps by the media, because there was no social media there to counteract a lot of the lies, but also a lot of stories that I was getting from people within Celtic, maybe people that you never mentioned there, but people who maybe talked a good game. But I was spun a lot of stuff about Fergus, and indeed a lot of the stuff that I found out through Tommy Burns. So a lot of my opinion, like a lot of the Celtic fans, and it was a considerable amount of people who booed him on that magnificent day when we unfolded it. You know, I'm wanting to find the inside scoop on Fergus here, that yes, he delivered what he said. How passionately was he as a Celtic fan? His memory, do you think Celtic Park should have a memory there to him, naming a stand or something? Because to this date, nothing has been done in his memory for what he's done. And it has been considerable what he's done, and it's been remarkable because, but just to give us a wee bit more on Fergus for the people who booed him, Shane, I put my hand up and say it was me.
Well, with a notable exception of Alex Ferguson, you usually only get a statue or a stand named after your deed. So there's no hurry for any of that, and I'm sure he wouldn't want to anyway because he's too modest. But to go back to all that booing stuff, you've got to remember that this guy put 90% of his personal wealth into this club. You don't do that, and I have to say, the risks were absolutely enormous. When he lent money, and he was the only one that lent money to Celtic, he lent it before he had control. He didn't have any shares. He wasn't a director. It was a massive risk. Some would say it was a crazy risk, but he did it. Now you don't do something like that unless you're a Celtic fan, and nobody can seriously question his credentials as a Celtic fan. He was secretary of the Croy Celtic Supporters Club, for example, when he stayed in Scotland before he left for Canada. He's a long-term supporter of Celtic. Even to this day, he's got seats in the North Stand, which he uses relatively incognito on a few occasions when he's over here. I met him earlier this month, to talk about this, that, and the other, but it turned out, to be talking about Celtic for 3 hours. So I don't think anybody can question his credentials as a Celtic fan. But secondly, what everybody forgets or forgot, when they were giving him a rough time, in the 5 years he was there, is that some very, very tough decisions had to get made. We raised all this money from the shareholders with the public issue, and all that money had to get spent on redeveloping that stadium. Now, the flip side of that is if you're spending most of your money on redeveloping the stadium, it has two outcomes. The first and immediate outcome is, by definition, you're going to have less money to spend in your squad. So you're not going to have as good a squad as you could have if you weren't building the stadium. But you had to build it, because if you didn't build it, you'd have nowhere to play, because you'd be breaking the law because you didn't have seats. So he had to be very focused, very determined, and he had to put up with all the people that were criticising him, for being tight with money. But he wasn't tight with money. He was just spending money on the infrastructure which has guaranteed our future. If he hadn't spent that money, shareholders' money, not his own money and everybody else's money, in building that stadium, we wouldn't have the 60,000 capacity stadium, the 50,000 season ticket revenues that would have paid the wages of Hearts and Sutton, Larson, and all these guys, that got us to the UEFA Cup final in 2002. We wouldn't have had all the money that got us to win the league championships over the years. It was only through being determined and focused and putting up with all the crap that he had to put up with when he was there that enabled us to make these achievements. And indeed, right now, if you draw a line in the sand, we have a solvent company which can compete with no debt to speak of, which can compete against most decent opposition. The main problem we've got now is that we don't have the television revenues we've got in England, but that's another issue for another day.
Going back to the time with Fergus now, the mindset of fans like myself who booed was that we perceived at the time that Fergus didn't do enough to stop them doing the 9 in a row. And at the time, a quote from, I think it was either Murdo MacLeod or Wim Jansen, who said that they won the league not because of Fergus McCann, it was in spite of it. Within days of that great achievement, we lost our manager, and all the internal strife that was there, the bickering, the infighting, the problems that the great Tommy Burns had with Fergus McCann. So this was part of the mindset of Celtic fans, and I think key to it was that we were becoming desperate to stop them as Fergus came in at the time. I don't know, was it 5, 6 in a row, but we saw them going 7. We saw them bringing in Gaza, spending all this money louder, and we were just desperate to match them. And we came mighty close under the great Tommy Burns, and God willing, I mean, we should have done it. And the other thing that Fergus faced was, and we'll get to that later on, but to touch on the thing, but he had to face against Jim Farry and the bigotry or the sectarianism of the SFA. But the mindset I'm talking about of the Celtic fan, how we were that desperate, and some of us perceived anyway, wrongly or rightly, that Fergus McCann didn't have that passion to stop them equalling our great achievement. And obviously now, as time has passed, we can now greatly say that what helped crush them was their desire to win the big cup. So we won our big cup in our 9 in a row, and we did it in the fairest way possible against cheats and Masonic cabal, as I would call it. They won it in a bad way, in a cheating way, with referees and the SFA helping them. But that's what I'm saying, the mindset. So can I ask this question? Do you feel that Fergus had that full passion? Because I think that was the point that I felt that Fergus didn't do enough to stop them doing at the time. But now seeing what happened, the bigger picture, that how they've been crushed by the debt, and hearing what you said there about the confines of how Fergus had to work it, then it is remarkable that we even did stop them for the 10. So it was beautiful then that we stopped them from doing that 10, but we just felt at the time we should have stopped them at 8, we should have stopped them at 9. But
well, I mean, the most important thing about a football team is obviously the quality of your players, and probably more importantly, the quality of your manager. You got to remember, David Murray said for every fiver we spend, he spends a tenner. So if you take that literally, even if we had doubled the playing budget, he would have doubled it again with money he didn't have, because we know he didn't have it, because we now know he didn't have it because of the problems that Rangers are in.
And what was the perception at the time?
So there was no guarantee of anything, but we had a good budget for the playing squad, but they always had more. And they would always have had more because he'd have spent twice what we spent. So no, I don't think there was any doubt about the commitment and the passion of Fergus McCann to Celtic at the beginning, when he was there, and subsequently. And there's no guarantee if we had spent more on the team that we would have Rangers would only have got 8 or 7. You just don't know.
Yeah.
We did spend an awful lot of money. We paid 1.75 million, for Bill O'Donnell.
Exactly.
When his market value was probably only half of that. That's a matter of fact. We did push the boat out when we were able to push the boat out. But it wouldn't really matter because Rangers have always overspent. They've overspent since 1988, right up to 3 years ago. They were always going to have a bigger player squad than we had, and it was always going to be difficult. And quite frankly, it was an achievement to win the league whilst we were still paying for that stadium. And in all the circumstances, I genuinely don't believe any person could have done any better. I don't think we could necessarily have had a better manager. I don't think we could necessarily have had a better chairman. I don't think we could necessarily have had a better team given where we found ourselves at the time. But it's very difficult because Fergus McCann never went out his way to ingratiate himself gratuitously to the media, to the fans. He just had a job to do. He was focused and he did it. And I don't want to sound smart here, but I always believed that in time, as each year passed, people would look back after he was gone and said, "Hey, what a dude that guy was," and that's the way it's worked out.
That's the way I'm feeling it just now.
The horde across the city, have been exposed for what they are.
So at the time,
in fact, I'm pretty sure if he unfurled the league flag at the start of next season, he'd an absolutely outrageously positive response.
Oh yeah.
Because there's lots of people like yourself that would have booed when he was here that will now feel, quite frankly, slightly embarrassed about it, if I may say so.
Well, I
would cheer him.
At the time, see, I've tried to give the concept, and for people there who weren't there at the time, my mindset and other people were frustrated at what was going on, and we didn't see the full picture. But obviously, for yourself, this is what question I wanted to ask, because I tried to outline the battle that Fergus fought and yourselves fought was against, the media, we all know them, against David Murray and his voodoo economics and his seemingly unlimitless supply of free money from the Bank of Scotland, the one that tried to crush us, opened the chequebook to him whenever he wanted, and against Jim Farry in the SFA. So if we deal with David Murray, first of all, how was he as a businessman? How was he? Could you see that he was a charlatan? And that, I don't know if you can comment the way I can. I couldn't give a monkey's, but give me your description of David Murray in the best way you can and how he was.
No, I wouldn't call him a charlatan. I would call him, an entrepreneur, and you would have to say a very successful entrepreneur. Given to the extent that he was, awarded this knighthood thing. So his business achievements are there as a matter of fact. But if you look at, the Rangers' experience in isolation and the amount of money they've blown, I mean, it's incredulous. And for example, he took control in '88, and the first thing he did was take £8 million off the fans to build that club deck, with that debenture. And all the investors, all the Rangers fans that invested in that have ended up with nada as a consequence of the liquidation. So they've lost all their money. But that was the first £8 million that came and went. And then a lot of people might remember he took £40 million for 29.9% off Joe Lewis and Daniel Levy, the current owners of Tottenham Hotspur. Yep. That's been and win as well. And then there was another 20 million, off what's that? Dave King, Alistair Johnson, bunch of other guys. That's been and gone.
There was also 20 million.
There was a 50 million rights issue as well. That's been and gone. And then when you add all that up together, then add up the overdraft, which ended up at 18 million. I mean, that's an incredulous amount of money that's been and gone.
There was also,
and ended up worth £1.
There was also another 20 million, just a wee side issue here. I don't know if you were at the time. I worked for the company at the time, NTL, but they were given internet rights deal, and Celtic turned them down. Do you know anything about that at the time?
I mean that was the talk of the day. All these multimedia companies were taking stakes in different football clubs. Rangers did the NTL deal, as a whole lot of other clubs did. I think Arsenal did a Granada deal, and there was several other deals whereby media companies took stakes in football clubs. But Celtic turned them down because you're basically selling your silverware by so doing. So
well, that was free money, that one, because they went bust themselves. They went through Chapter 11 bankruptcy themselves. NTL, about 11 billion just wiped off the face of the earth for them, and Rangers took that. But anyway, that was a side issue. So yeah, you're right. All that money that they took, And so Mr. Murray took all this money and sold it for £1. How do you feel what happened there with what's happened with Rangers, the way it's ended up? Do you feel that that was the right manoeuvre for him to do, to sell it for £1
Well,
to Mr. White?
that's a wee bit more difficult, but just regarding all that money that he took, he took it off consenting adults of sound mind, so it's, you have to have different people at the end of the deal to do that, so there's nothing wrong with it per se. You could question how it was used, but, just to put the proper context.
Oh, true.
It was all done properly, let's be clear about that.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, no problem at all, yeah.
So, but, I said earlier on that right up till the mid-80s, Scottish football lived within its means. So, David Holmes and David Murray sort of started this borrowing philosophy in the mid-80s. And that borrowing philosophy in football continued for a generation right up till 2008 with the financial crash in Lehman Brothers. Uh-huh. That's when it all ended. So what we're now, and all the other clubs, borrowed off banks, usually the Bank of Scotland, but not exclusively, to different degrees over that generational span. But that is the exception rather than the rule, and since 2008, what you've had is banks progressively taking their money back out of Scottish football, till eventually we'll have a situation whereby there's hardly any bank debt in Scottish football. So, the game ended in 2008, and that's when, some of these cosy relationships with the Bank of Scotland ended. Bank of Scotland were taken over by Lloyds Bank. All these special relationships, disappeared, and the culture, from that point was we want our money back as far as the banks were concerned. Yeah. That's when Rangers, had to start paying down their debt. That's when Lloyds TSB put a couple of guys on the board. That's when the game changed, because Celtic, the great rivals of Rangers, were financially solvent. And I don't know for sure, but I would imagine that, and at the time, although it wasn't generally reported, that's Rangers were being investigated by HMRC over these EBTs. So I could imagine, David Murray having been in there for a generation, thinking, well, time to get out, but how am I going to get out? Sure, I can put a cheaper team on the park, and sure, I can save money and get the bank debt down, and I think they did get the bank debt down to an almost manageable level, 18 million quid. But, I'm pretty sure he was under pressure just to pay all that off. But the club was difficult to sell, because you had, when you do your due diligence, i.e. check the books, or any potential purchaser gets his advisor to check the books, the first thing you'll see, or as I think Alistair Johnson said, the elephant in the room was this HMRC tax investigation, over the EBTs. So, that would have put 99 out of 100 prospective buyers off. And of course, we all know that the 1 in 100 that wasn't put off was the very famous or infamous Craig White. So, he bought the club for £1, and I don't believe for 1 minute that the seller, Murray International, didn't know what this guy was about at all. I think it was crystal clear what he was about. I think all the Rangers directors, whether they were on the little committee they put together side, or whether they were on the Murray International side, all knew this guy's background, and they knew what they were doing when they did it, but didn't think it would unfold as dramatically as it did.
You see, for myself, I try to be an investigative journalist of ill repute, and I've tried to tie down how this could all have happened. For myself, the bold Craigie White, I managed to make front page news back in March when a good brother from the Huddle Board passed me his number. And since then, I phoned David Murray, I phoned Duff and Phelps, Charles Walder, to the recent people Senkos, who are selling the Rangers, to Imran Ahmed, to David Greer, to David Whitehouse, Paul Clark, Imran Ahmed, Brian Stockbridge, all the key participants, just on the chase and to find out and put stuff together, and even all the American participants, which was all a scam. And I've came to the conclusion that someone like maybe David Greer, who worked for the Bank of Scotland, who then moved in to insolvency practice or helping distressed companies, and the tie-in with Mr. Murray, that I would say is that he couldn't allow, or being a Knight of the Realm, to have in his hands a liquidation of a fine establishment club as Rangers. So find a patsy to take the dairy for it, and you see all the compliant media who have been fed the succulent lamb for decades, all willing to jump on and say, oh, it's all Craig White's fault, conveniently forgetting that the person who allowed Mr. White in the first place was a person who said he would only sell that club to someone with a sound personal Rangers at heart. And clearly Craig White was none of the sort. But what was allowed to happen when the Layman's disaster happened in 2008, if you remember, Rangers get beat by Kaunas and they invested in their team. And the debt that was outstanding when Mr. Murray left was only maybe 18 million or so to the Bank of Scotland or Lloyds, but they'd also owned debt to other football clubs, so maybe a tune of 10, 15 million. So what I'm saying is, instead of paring down and pulling back the money, Mr. Murray obviously having Rangers fans, a famous clip from somebody called Billy Noel, that after a Champions League game, he famously shouts, I'm going to jump off the Coven rear stand and get you, Mr. Murray. So Mr. Murray sat there knowing that a lot of these bears were getting really unhappy, and if he put on a bad team, then they were going to get severely unhappy. So he had to outstretch his hand in a fit of hubris and say, give us more money, the Bank of Scotland. And it ended up, instead of paring down his debts and instead of looking out for the looming tax bill that may be there, he did nothing of the sort and helped run it into the ground with the kind of financial management that Baldrick would be proud of, or a cunning plan from Baldrick, except Mr. Murray, I think, wanted to wash his hands of it, bring in Mr. White, engineer a whole kit and caboodle, hoping that Rangers would be go through car wash bankruptcy, as they call it in America, where what would happen would be the carcass is washed clean and all the debts are disappeared. What Bill Miller said would happen has actually happened. So all the debts of Rangers has disappeared. The only fly in the ointment that happened was that Rangers didn't get jettisoned back into the Premier League. But we're going to find out in the next week or so that maybe they'll be back sooner than the 3 years as the proper, what should have been meted out to them. So what I'm saying to you is this whole cabal in Scotland as it existed with Mr. Murray and his little puppets all over the place helping him out, all these succulent media friends. Obviously, I know you're maybe not going to comment on everything I'm saying here, but this is what I've, in my head, came to the conclusion of what has happened here, that for Mr. Murray to walk away and to allow this to happen, he was in no way duped by Mr. White, and he allowed all this to happen for the reason that, you know, his voodoo economics, he's leveraging up to $1 billion almost from the Bank of Scotland. It's all came crashing asunder with what you said there, the Lehmans, the banks putting a squeeze on everything. So you're dealing with Mr. Murray. But, well, is that a totally wild, outlandish conspiracy?
No,
there for you, David?
no. I mean, you get some sort of. I'm not convinced there's a conspiracy. The most important thing, game-changing event that's happened in the last 5 years was the financial crash in 2008 in Lehman Brothers. That was game-changing. That was when banks themselves became insolvent. And when a bank becomes insolvent, it's got to bring money in rather than lend money out. And that was the seismic event that changed the game for the economy right down to football clubs.
Well, of course,
and there's other football clubs that are precarious. So at that point, I'm pretty sure that's when David Murray decided he wanted out of Rangers. And it may well be he wanted a patsy, and it may well be, Craig White, was that patsy. But what nobody could fully have known is exactly the detail of how it would unfold. I don't think anybody expected it to unfold in the manner that it has, i.e. with your using Americanisms. What we've actually got is Chapter 7, liquidation, rather than Chapter 11, administration. So I think they were all believed that if the EBT big tax case went against Rangers, and I think everybody expected, including the people at Rangers, expected it to go against Rangers. That would have resulted in administration rather than liquidation. But liquidation it is, or liquidation it was. You've now got Newco, and they're in the third division, the Fiorentina style. Not too many people should be that surprised that if old Rangers cease to exist Fiorentina style, that new Rangers should start off in the bottom rung Fiorentina style. I'm saying Fiorentina because that happened to Fiorentina, so I'm sure that a lot of people were upset about that, be the Rangers fans, even be the SPL chairman, because I don't think anybody expected new Rangers, to be where they are, and that's sort of made life difficult for a whole lot of clubs, whether it's Celtic or any of the other SPL clubs. But they're all responsible. Everybody's responsible for Rangers being where they are, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, no, sorry.
But I don't think there was a conspiracy though, because nobody knew how this would unfold. Well, nobody.
Well, if you don't pay your bills, if you don't pay your debt, if you bring in payments that are don't comply. I want another call I made, and I've been chasing down FIFA and people who are part of it. That these dual contracts. So the dubious nature of these, forget about the tax avoidance or evasion. The documents that was given out last week, for me, I didn't expect Rangers to be made guilty of anything, found guilty of anything, because we live in a country that is run by some Masonic cabal, as far as I'm concerned, and having two gentlemen on there, I don't want to cover this bit, and anyway, I'm digressing from my main bit that I want to cover, David. Anyway, let's forget all the stuff about Sevco. Concentrate. Forget all David Murray. It's as far as I'm concerned, I was only trying to find out, what David Murray was like at the time, how he was to deal with at Celtic. Jumping on then to Jim Farry, what was he like to deal with in the non-compliance from the SFA at the time?
So I have never had any dealings with Jim Farry directly, who of course is dead now. Nobody, but I do know, because I was in and around the scene, that nobody actually could understand, why he handled George Cadetti registration in the manner that he did, because that was the event that ended up with Farry getting sacked. Mm-hmm. I'm reading Kevin McCarra's book about just now, which talks about this, and there's got quotes from Fergus, McCann, and quotes from other people talking about this. And, nobody could quite understand why that registration was handled the way it was, but it was, and Farry gets sacked. But beyond that, I know a little more and can see a little more. I've met David Murray a good few times, and superficially, it just seems like a regular guy. But when we look at Rangers, we can see what's happened. So nothing more to add to that either.
No. I was, as I say, I was trying to get, and obviously, for me, I'm mentioning the Masonic influence. On the famous picture with John Gregg and Tiny Wharton performing a wee handshake on the pitch, and many of the Celtic fans, you come from the Celtic background, the famous chant, "Who's the Mason in the black?" And year after year, decisions would go against Celtic, and you would stand there, and Celtic players would get sent off or booked, and penalties would be given, and you're like, what's going on here? And countless referees, and there's always been this kind of image the Celtic fans have had of the establishment in Rangers. And many people, myself, I didn't think that they were going to be made bankrupt. I didn't think they were going to get made guilty. I didn't think they would end up as far down as it is. But anyway, we are where we are. And the point that I'm trying to get to is how Fergus prevented, and your good self and Matt McGlone and others, how we helped prevent Celtic falling into this abyss. How bad were the bank at dealing with Celtic at the time, David?
Well, Celtic had a very poor experience with the Bank of Scotland at the time. You got to remember that Rangers almost went bust for £6 million in 1988, and what the bank did was find a buyer in the shape of David Murray. Now for a very similar amount of money in 1994. The Bank of Scotland were, trying to make, or wanted their money back, and were trying to find a buyer, to buy Celtic. But the only guy that really sort of ponied up with the money was Fergus McCann. But the Bank of Scotland were giving Celtic a really rough time in 1994, and they did say that unless we had £1 million in our bank account, by I can't remember the date, but it was a certain date. This was going into receivership, as it may have been called at the time, rather than administration. With another £4 million to follow within 2 days. And I do recall that there was a meeting in Glasgow with all the usual suspects, but it took Fergus McCann's money, or Fergus McCann's dollars, to come from the States to London to Glasgow, and then a banker's draft carried across to 110 St Vincent Street. And I remember, Fergus McCann, because I was there, handing over that cheque, and me witnessing it, and I remember looking at my watch, and it was 11:52. So I would conclude that Celtic were 8 minutes from receivership or administration in 1994, because the bank were taking a hard line view on the money they were owed and wanted it back, and they got it back. But as soon as the takeover was complete the following month, the 4th of April, and Fergus McCann was installed as chairman, etc. You get rid of Bank of Scotland, and the Co-op Bank, who I think are also in St Vincent Street, became Celtic's bankers, and they're still Celtic's bankers to this day. So the first thing McCann did was get rid of Bank of Scotland.
So then, I mean, what you've just proven then is my conspiracy theory isn't too loony after all, that a bank that sits there with David Greer, Gavin Masterton, and good close friends of the Edinburgh circuit to David Murray, sits there almost pulling the plug on Celtic for £1 million, sits there and extends Mr. Murray's, or leverages his whole Murray International holdings to almost £1 billion, and the Rangers stuff. So it's extraordinary. They were close to killing us for £1 million. That is just...
No, the one thing, the Celtic's overdraft at the time, from memory, I remember, was like £5 or £6 million, which is very similar to the debt that Rangers had in 1988. And it's not wrong. I mean, I can't really talk about conspiracies, or I don't want to talk about conspiracies.
No, sorry for dragging you in that way, David.
But at the end of the day, a bank's entitled to, if the person that has lent the money to, doesn't conform to the terms of that loan, strictly speaking, it's entitled to ask for their money back. So that's what they were doing. They were exercising their entitlement to ask for their money back and saying when they wanted it back by, which was a deadline. Well, that deadline was met. It was met by Fergus McCann, and it was met with 8 minutes to spare. So I'm not going to go down the conspiracy road.
No, I'm not asking you to.
They got their money and then they get sacked afterwards. That's what happened.
I'm not asking you to, David. I'm duty bound as an internet bandpot to air my feelings at the time, and coming from the Celtic fan background, we're always looking for the Masons in the black or even black suits. So if they're Masons in black suits in the Bank of Scotland want to close us for £1 million, I'm just going to say it as it is. But obviously I don't know that. They're just bankers. They're nice guys. I'm looking to talk to as many good people as possible. And I'd like to speak to Mr. Murray if he would allow me to air some of the, or maybe change my mind, like I've been changed my mind by Fergus McCann. The Fergus McCann, getting back to his dealings, at the end when he left, the last bit of problem that I had with it, David, and maybe you can help me on it, was when he left, he asked all the Celtic fans to sign a cheque to Fergus McCann. Now, just knowing a small bit about the stock market, the initial offering at the start was on a closed market where there was 5 preference and 5 ordinary shares. I think it was £60 each or whatever. And then because it was on a closed market, it was on a small market, there was limited amount of shares. But when Fergus sold at the final offering and took his 35 million or whatever, then the cheque was asked to, not to Celtic. Up to that point, every cheque was asked to be made to Celtic, but this one was to made to Fergus McCann. Now, just knowing a little bit about the stock market, when he opened it up to the big market, as we call it, then on the main market, then he diluted the shareholding. For every one share, everyone became 100 shares. Now, the stock market value maybe at that time was about, for those initial shares that was given at, say, £600, was maybe up at 3,000 or something like that. Now, with the major dilution of that, it was always going to become the case. And what happened from Fergus walking away, within 6 years, the next offering that Celtic offered in 2005 was 30 pence a share. And when Fergus left, it was 280 at that offering. Now, for me as a small layperson, just buying and selling shares, as I did for a period, I was able to identify, well, hold on, he must have known that by operating it from a 1 share to 100, putting it onto the big market where Celtic fans, where if it's a closed market, Celtic fans, once they initially got that for the first time in 100 years, nobody was wanting to sell those shares. So that's why the share market rose up at the time. So nobody was wanting to sell them. So there were 3,000. So Fergus must have known that the dilution of shares was going to leave Celtic fans holding shares that became worthless within a short period of time. And that was one of the main things that added the final coup de grace felt at Fergus at the time. But then analysing it, but Aunt, who bought into it at the time, she still holds those shares. And as a Celtic fan, it matters not what they paid for it. They're still holding on to it and still entitled to say, well, I'm a Celtic thing. So in the whole grand scheme of things, it doesn't mean much. But for me, at the time, I felt it was a little bit cheeky of Fergus. But finish me what I'm saying. He deserved to have his money. He deserved to have his money. But I'm just saying how I felt at the time it was cheeky, but not saying that he didn't deserve to have the money. I'm not saying he was cheeky about taking the money because he deserved that. I just felt at the time what had happened. But sorry, on you go, David.
Well, what was right, I don't think that's quite correct. When they came to the stock market in January 1994, 1995, it was a package of shares that cost £64. I think the ordinary shares were 64 and the preference shares were 60. And you get 500 of each. I think might have been £500 of each might have been the minimum.
It was five each was the minimum.
62, and they come on to the alternative investment market.
Yeah.
Now this was when all the track record of football share issues to that date had been a flop. Hibernian had come to the market and had been a flop. Millwall had come to the market and had been a flop. Even Manchester United came to the market and was a massive flop. The shares were trading at a massive discount to what they were issued at. There was no track record of any successful football flotation anywhere. Celtic came to the market. So that was risky, but it was always the plan. So they came to the alternative investment market, and it was the most successful football share issue, possibly to date, that I can think of. But it was the right, by accident, it turned out to be quite a fortuitous time, because what you had was the advent of the English Premiership in 1992, the influx of Sky money into the English system, and then in 1998 you had the formation of the SPL. But you've already alluded to this earlier. During that period you had a whole lot of overinflated expectations about multimedia rights. Granada, you had all these different football clubs, large and small, good and bad, all come into the stock market, all because everybody was throwing money all over the place, all these multimedia companies, because they all had inflated expectations about this new internet thing, this new multimedia stream, and everybody was going to make a whole lot of money. And football share, and this wasn't known at the time, but football share prices, went crazy. In fact, the Celtic shares you were talking about, went up from 62, to 500 quid, right, at one point. And you got to remember, a whole lot of Celtic fans sold their shares. If you bought something at 60, no matter how much you love Celtic, and it goes from 60 to 500, and you have your Christmas presents to pay for, or whatever, or a new car to pay for, and suddenly you find yourself with a whole lot more money than you bargained for. a lot of people thought of selling and indeed did sell. So there were a lot of Celtic fans made a whole lot of money out of their Celtic shares, and that's a matter of fact, not a matter of debate. And it's simply because all this multimedia excessive speculation in the 1990s took place. Now, when Fergus McCann, remembering, and in the interim, the board, decided to go to the main market. That's right, and of course, have subsequently gone back to the game market from where they started. But you got to remember that when Fergus McCann sold his shares, it was at 288, not 500, and he had no control over the share price. All he'd said was that I'm going after 5 years, and I'm going to offer my shares to the fans. So he said this at the beginning, and he did what he said he was going to do, but he had no control over that share price. So that share price could have been anything. Could have been 500, or it could have been, a pound.
No, but it's
anyway,
I know it's
it turned out to be £2.80, as you correctly say. And Dermot Desmond, bought most of them, but fans all had the opportunity to buy it. But the biggest buyer was Dermot Desmond, and he's no fool.
No, I understand.
So, and of course, since then, all the clubs that came to the stock market have all come off the stock market. And Celtic's one of the very few that's left. In fact, I can't think of any. There was probably one or two, but Celtic's the only decent club that's left in the stock market. And yeah, you're right. A couple of years ago, they had a share issue at 30 pence, and the shares are currently 38.5 pence. And I have no idea where they'll be in the next 12 months.
I've also had this worry that although it was brilliant what Fergus did, now, and I brought this up in particular, David, for your good self, and it's now back to the AIM market, but by allowing us to go into the big market where the dilution of shares meant that there was more investment bankers, more pension funds, or more people who have not got a Celtic allegiance to it. And now, okay, we might be in the AIM market, but we've still got a lot of shares out there. And the market cap of Celtic, and I'll say this loosely, is only, 30 million. Now, given that...
No, it's not. It's 50 million, or 48 million.
Is it?
Because there's three classes of capital. There's ordinary, there's preferred, and there's preference. When you add them all together, it's 48 million.
Right, well, okay then. Well, and when I say only, I'm saying that in comparison to some of the deals for English Premier League teams in the future, if something was to happen, then Celtic is tremendously undervalued. If we were to become a part of a bigger league or get more revenue for the TV, as you hinted at earlier, if something was miraculous to happen. Now, the thing that I've got a worry for is that Celtic is unguarded just now for a takeover, an unwanted takeover by anyone, and a person or a group of people can come in and do what the Glazers did, or what happened at Liverpool, and indeed what happened at Rangers under Craig White, where all the debt is loaded on from the takeover onto it in some way, shape or form. And
Dermot Desmond, is the de facto controlling shareholder. He's got 44% of Celtic voting shares, and for such a thing as you've just described to happen, Dermot Desmond would have to consent to that. Now, as a matter of fact, Dermot Desmond is a very big Celtic fan, and I'm not going to get into a debate, guys that like Dermot Desmond and guys that don't. You could never take away the fact that he is a Celtic fan. He's a very wealthy Celtic fan. And the scenario that you're talking about, I don't see happening. I don't see Dermot Desmond has any inclination to sell his shareholding in Celtic. And if he did, and I don't think he would sell at current level, because he's a canny businessman, but most importantly, I don't think he would sell to a green Craig White.
But obviously not, unless.
And of course, we don't have any debt.
Yeah, of course. No, but what?
And the days of doing Glazers did their deal pre-Lehman, when that type of leverage finance was available. Gillette and Hicks at Liverpool did it just as the ball was bursting. and I don't think anybody anywhere could do such a leverage deal as that in this environment, and that being for the foreseeable future.
Well then, unless the only other outlook would be then, and maybe Celtic fans would love something like this to happen, and some people have even accused Mr. Desmond, not that I'm doing it, but not, well, the same accusation that was put to Fergus somewhat was he's not passionate enough for Celtic, and if he's got billions, why doesn't he put more into it? And the thing that Celtic fans would maybe love to happen was for an Arab sheikh to come in a la Man City and say, here's a blank chequebook, go and get the big cut back for us. And I mean, Celtic fans would love that.
Do you really mean that? Because when you analyse that, what you're basically saying is, Dermot Desmond's got a whole lot of money. Well, David Murray's got a whole lot of money. Do you want Dermot Desmond to go down the road that David Murray did
Never.
And to lend the club?
Never.
The money so that the club is beholden to one individual to the extent the Rangers were. So,
Never.
Well, one, he would never do it. Two, the board would never accept it. And three, it's stupid to do it. I mean, at the end of the day, it makes sense for any business, any football club, to live within its means. And that's what Celtic do. They only went into debt once, and that is when they brought Martin O'Neill in, and they went into £20 million worth of debt, and Martin O'Neill went and spent that on Neil Lennon, John Hart's and Chris Sutton and Husmal Harron. And that was a debt that was underwritten, or guaranteed, if you like, by Dermot Desmond. And that debt was extinguished when they had a share issue, I think 2005, and they issued all these preference shares, and Dermot Desmond being the biggest buyer, but fans bought some as well. So Celtic are debt-free. I suggest sensible Celtic fans want them to remain debt-free, want them to live within their means. We would like to have more money. We'd like to have English television money. And if we did, we would spend that in the team, and we'd have a much better team, and we'd do much better in Europe. But quite frankly, there is next to no prospect of getting our hands on English-style multimedia money. And that is the major challenge for the Celtic board, and they are addressing it by having good scouting system and going out and finding all your Izagers and your Wanyamas and your Kayals.
Yeah.
And the way that we have to compete the same as Porto and Ajax, who are our contemporaries, big fish in small ponds, is to be clever in the transfer market, sell at least one player every year and reinvest that wisely. Lenny's done that with the McGeady money. I mean, it's odds on, this is me personally speaking, I used to add, we'll sell a jewel, like the Forster or Wanyama, and as long as that money is recycled sensibly, that's the only way we can proceed whilst we don't have access to English-style multimedia monies.
No, I know. I mean,
and it's the greatest challenge. In fact, I would go as far as saying it's as big a challenge as it was in the early 90s when we changed the board. How do we get our hands on English and Spanish style multimedia money to enable a club, one of the largest and best clubs in the world, to maintain its status as a leading club? If we don't come up with a solution for that in 10 or 20 years' time, we'll just be another Diddy club, in European terms. We're trying to run up a down escalator in this league, and the sooner we can get out of it, the better. But there's no easy way of doing that.
I mean, for me,
FIFA don't want it.
I know. Well, for me, David, right, I sat in St Mary's Chapel alongside Dermot Desmond, Peter Lawwell, not exactly alongside them, but I was sitting there watching them because I was in the wee upper bit, and it touched me as a Celtic fan, knowing that 125 years later, or before that, how Celtic were founded, how we came to be, and our whole ethos, the founding fathers, and then the fans, the way we've took that forward as a family. And for me, to actually be here, when these other people from the other side have been telling us to go home, the famine's over, for us to be here in this form, I mean, for us, it's a victory. For me, it's a personal victory, and for us, just to actually be here as a Celtic fan, as a Celtic club, to do everything that we've had, So for me to turn up, I don't care if we win, as the song says, and that's what I it's annoying me when I see Celtic fans becoming irate and chastising the manager. We've never had it so good. We've just beat one of the best teams that the world has ever seen in Barcelona. We're 3 divisions above our main rivals since our inception. We're in all the cups. We're doing well. We're financially sound. We've got everything, and yet people are still moaning and criticising. And for me, I don't want. I mean, the reason why I was mentioning that, bringing it up to you, David, because of your background, because I'm trying to think, well, how can Celtic be protected? And it seems that, you've answered that right, that Dermot Desmond, the only reservation I would say that he owes those shares. Could he be like the Celtic fans who saw a wee profit at some point, when the share issue was done? He could be willing to accept it both as a profit. But I'm not wanting any person to come in like David Murray and a win at all cost attitude, because that's not what football's all about. In fact, I'm enjoying in a sick wee way that when Celtic get a wee stumble, and the league has never been so competitive, so it shoots down the argument of these trumpets in the media who say the league is dead and it needs a strong Rangers. No, we're back to what the league was prior to the debt burden that was placed on it, that you've identified here. In 1986, if you go back to 85, 84, I was a kid, I was 10, 11, 12, and I was brought up in the diet of Dave Narey, of Willie Miller, of Aberdeen, of Dundee United, conquering all over Europe. I even had the privilege to speak to Alec McLeish just the other day there and told him, as a kid, I was enthralled that they beat Real Madrid. And this was when Scottish football was buoyant and had something good to offer. And for me as a Celtic fan,
but the game has changed, though. I agree with that, and to a degree, but only when you're talking about the domestic game. If there is no bank debt in the domestic game, you end up with a much more level playing field than you did when it was distorted by all these Rangers borrowings, if you like.
And that's what we're seeing now.
So now that you've removed that distortion, the gap between the bigger clubs, which is Celtic, and in due course it will be Rangers, and all the other clubs has narrowed. And you will end up with a more competitive league, and it is entirely possible, that an Aberdeen or a Hearts or a Kilmarnock, not Kilmarnock, a Hearts, could split up the old firm or maybe even win the league, as Dundee United and Aberdeen did in the past. That's entirely possible. But the challenge, the Celtic that I was telling you about, the Celtic, that I started supporting, when I saw them lose to Liverpool in the semi-final of the Cup Winners' Cup, and I was going to all these Vojvodina games, Leeds United games, Fiorentina games, Inter and AC Milan games. That was par for the course, and we were a big team, and we got to quarter-finals, semi-finals, and finals. That's the team that I support. An international brigade, an international Celtic. Celtic playing Barcelona like we did the other week there. But what I'm saying is that is going to become increasingly difficult because of the increasing chasm between the amount of money available to what I'll call Diddy clubs with access to huge revenues. You could argue Chelsea is just the third biggest club in London, but because it's got a billionaire and English television money, that's how it gets to win the Champions League, because it's got the money to buy the players.
But it doesn't always guarantee success.
We don't have that, and we're unlikely to ever have it unless we come up with another cunning plan.
Well, the cunning plan is what you identified there, David. We're doing that cunning plan just now. There's a 2012 equivalent to your cunning plan happening, and you identified it. We can compete. We just did compete against Barcelona. We find a young player.
Even the most optimistic, Celtic fan would concede that it'd be very difficult to get a semi-final, never mind a final, never mind win it. It's possible, out with the big five leagues. The only team that's done it in the last 10 years is Porto.
That's what I'm saying.
In 2003 from memory, that's almost 10 years ago.
2004, but the template's there.
As each year passes, the amount of teams that aren't big leagues diminishes, and it becomes more difficult. And it's going to become increasingly more difficult as each year passes. So it's all about money. And UEFA via Platini has introduced various different rules, whereby you put financial caps on the amount of money you can spend. But there's lots of ways around that, and it will remain increasingly difficult for a club of Celtic stature, to attain, the levels, that we've grown up with, and that's the challenge that's the challenge for the present. How do we remain a big club on the international arena? That's the real challenge that faces Celtic.
Do you not think that what happened there just a few weeks ago against Barcelona, big in terms of money, and obviously coming from your financial background, David, I know you're thinking on that, but surely with Celtic being big, is there a club that could have put on a spectacle better than that anywhere last week?
No, we couldn't. It couldn't.
So we've got
nobody
to be
could
one
have
of
put
the biggest then.
Well, nobody I can think of could put on a spectacle like that. And it was fantastic, but I think it's rare. That's what I'm saying. I grew up being used to nights like that. I mentioned all the teams that you used to see when you were a kid. I saw Celtic beat Real Madrid 2-0 in 1980. Yeah. It was the norm back in the day. Yeah. For Celtic to beat anybody at Celtic Park.
So to get to that,
to get into the latter stages of Europe, it's now the exception. We've got to the last 16 twice under Gordon Strachan. We've got a very good chance of getting to the last 16, under Lenny. But it's the exception now rather than the rule. All I'm saying is, without access to all that money, it's going to stay. It's going to be a rarity that you have nights like that. That we had against Barcelona.
Well, we're
talking about the good nights. Think of all the bad nights all the bad results.
Of course.
They're much more frequent than the good nights.
Yeah. Well, our European record at home, beating Man United, Juventus, Barcelona, and other teams, although we're never competing at the higher echelons, like you say, the semi-finals and the finals, and it would be lovely to get to that. Well, can I ask you, if you were in and had a cunning plan at UEFA, would the cunning plan be to follow, say for example, Celtic, if there was to be a Super League similar to what the NFL has got? Now, people can point to the European market that if all these big teams want a proper competition, they should come out of their own domestic leagues, form a kind of closed league shop, 20-24 teams, like the North American League, and they would increase their pulling power for the revenue, get far more money in, and have a closed shop. And at that point, because there is no, like you say, there's no competition between the smaller teams like Porto, Ajax. It's increasingly harder. The only way would be to invite clubs like Celtic, Porto, Ajax into a league and allow us the facilities to do it. And surely with a performance like the Celtic fans put on there, the stadium, we would be invited into something like that. But the question I was going to ask you, if you were in UEFA, would you implement a policy of wage capping, or would you implement a policy of, say, like as I pointed out, American football? It's almost like a communist system where they've got a draft system where the money is pooled collectively. Can you ever see a system that UEFA would bring anything like that in for a Super League or for the national leagues? Because the only way to address it, if we were going to get to the bottom of the inequality of the difference of the money, the only way to do it is follow exactly what's happening in American football and have a full system where the money is pulled together in a pot and everything is distributed equally, and then we're going to get a chance, because that is the only way. But it's never going to happen, is it, David?
Well, never say never, and I don't believe it will never happen in the answer to your question. But at the end of the day, it's always money. Money is always the factor that changes things. Money was behind, the advent of the English Premiership League in 1992, and that was when big clubs basically said, we can earn more money by changing the status quo. And the casualties of that change said you can't do that. And they were on the court steps, money changed hands, and it happened. Exactly the same thing happened in Scotland in 1998. We'll earn more money if we form the SPL. The SFL said you can't do it. And they go to court, money changes hands, and it happens. So although it's very true to say that nothing changes without money changing hands. If money changes hands, that's when you get change. Right now, the only way there could be change on the international stage is if the participants in the international stage thought they can earn more money as a consequence of that change. So you have to reach that point, and the way that you would reach that point, and we're nowhere near it yet, is if television viewing figures started to go down because everybody was fed up watching Manchester United play Stoke or Chelsea play Aston Villa or whatever, but there's no sign that that's going to happen. FIFA are trying to address the imbalances, by talking about having a Balkan league, instead of 6 tiny little former Yugoslavian leagues. Ditto in the Baltic states, Sweden right through to Latvia and Lithuania, and there's now early talk of, having some sort of European leagues. But that's just tinkering with it. That's not good. I'm not all that interested, for example, in Celtic playing AEK Sweden or whatever, or Anderlecht. I want Celtic to be playing Barcelona and Paris Saint-Germain and Milan and all these teams, because we're as big, if not bigger, than a lot of these teams, and that's the arena we should be playing in. So you won't get that unless there's somebody goes to court, or enforces a change under European law, or the people that have already got their hands in the money think they can earn more money by, I don't know if you're old enough to remember, Kerry Packer, changing cricket in the 1970s, forming a breakaway league, just saying to FIFA, we don't care about FIFA, we don't care about UEFA, we're forming a super league of our own teams for ourselves. Unless you get something as seismic and dramatic as that involves the people that doing that earning more money, it's not going to happen. So it's either going to be a legal challenge or a financial challenge.
And in your life, people say that when it happened in your life, can you envisage that happening, David?
Yeah, I sure can.
You sure can, within 5, 10, 15, what time frame?
No, I couldn't put a time frame on it, but I can see change, But no, I'm not going to put a time frame on it.
No, I'd be silly to do that. No, but if you look at the current outlook, I mean, if Man City fans can't fill their stadium against Real Madrid, then we've serious problems. And I was over for an El Clasico there, the last one. I was over the one in April, and they were selling tickets there for about 2-3 grand. I don't know about the financial austerity measures that have collapsed somewhat, but when I went there to the last one there just a month or so ago, just before the Celtic, there was tickets aplenty, and all the silently lured Barca fans were giving them away, more or less, So the only way to bring it about would be the fans revolt or to pull back from going into it, or the TV companies from giving the money. But Sky has just done a massive deal. So the only outlook then is for fans to pull away or to fall away, you reckon, and that would bring the change?
Well, fans are already falling away, but the income that fans generate is becoming less and less important to the income that multimedia generates. So that's why, in Spain, you have, it's almost like the Scottish League. Madrid and Barca, more often than not, can absolutely win convincingly against all the other teams, and they end up top 2 by some considerable margin. And the crowds in Spain, are falling all the time. Even in England, it's the top 4, the top 6. Nobody's got a hope. Crowds, I think, are falling there. If you look at the 2 most competitive big leagues with the biggest crowds that treat the fans the best are Germany and Spain. Yeah. France have got a salary cap, and you've got an open league. Montpellier won it last year. Anybody can win it, essentially, even though Paris Saint-Germain have got oil money behind them. In Germany, you haven't a clue who's going to win that. Everybody's got 30, 40, 50, 80,000 crowds. Fans are treated with respect and can buy cheap tickets. And and they've also got rules that say, the fans have to own 51% of the clubs in Germany. These are good models. But that doesn't necessarily mean that these teams will win the Champions League. It's the teams with the most money that have the shortest odds in winning the Champions League, and that's because multimedia revenues are the most important revenues in a football club's income statement. So you have to get your hands on multimedia money, which is essentially so that the Asians can watch, all the Asian market can watch competitive football. So until that happens, we're stuck with what we've got unless there's a legal challenge to under European law, which might be a more hopeful avenue than change from within.
Right.
Anyway, I'm more or less exhausted. I have to go.
Sorry, David, for taking your time. You've been brilliant, mate.
No problem.
Thanks a lot for going through absolutely everything, mate. It's been a pleasure and a joy. You're a great Celtic man, mate. For all my misgivings about Fergus, you've a lot of the stuff that a lot of it I've came to see in recent times that the guy did very well, and for your part, mate, I can only thank you for what you did and being a Celtic fan to step up the plate to show that love, because the most important thing about Celtic, it's not about the team in the pitch, it's not about the temporary custodians who could be taken away or whatever, will not be there. It's about the ordinary day fan. It's about the person in the street who collectivises, who talks to their friends, their brothers, who's got a collective experience. It's something that we all love and we can share and with great pride in, that we were born out of proper ways. The reasons why we were born was because of what happened, to the Irish community, and what Brother Wolf has seen, the injustice and people starving. And then Celtic fans collectively get together and help each other out, like the Ty Towns, the Kabira Celtic. The whole ethos of Celtic is about helping each other out. And you helped Celtic in the face of what I would perceive as an evil tyrant that was out to do us up like a kipper. And your part, God bless you for what you did there, David, and thank you for myself and anybody else who would agree with me that it can't be underestimated that we would have been killed, we would have been in the same bad way as Rangers without people like yourself, Matt McGlone and others, countless individuals, Fergus, McCann, Brian Dempsey and whoever. Last point and whatever, and I'll let you go then, brother, if that's okay.
No problems, okay, that's brilliant, thanks a lot.
Take care, David, take care, God bless.
Catch you later, cheers, bye-bye.
That was David Lowe there, and thank you very much for that time, David. It's brilliant, yeah, brilliant. It's an hour and 25 minutes, and so thank you very much from Internet Bampot Radio Division, Glasgow Radio Online, and we'll be back after this little break. Let's see, I've not got a break lined up. Forgot I had that wee bit there. Well, let's see. My good friend Brian Clough can't get enough of this brother.
But as far as I'm concerned, the first thing you can do for me is to chuck all your medals and all your caps and all your pots and all your pans into the biggest flipping dustbin you can find, because you've never won any of them fairly. You've done it all by blooming cheating.
But you'll have to forgive me, as I've been listening to Rangers fans singing how they'd like to wade up to their knees in my blood over the last 50 years. So, ha ha Rangers, ha ha ha. But
that's the bottom line. The big house must stay open. That's the bottom line. The big house must stay open. That's the bottom line.
So, thank you for joining me tonight. That was an interview with David Lowe, more than just a financial expert and advisor to Fergus McCann. The work he put in, the groundwork in securing Celtic back for the fans, should not be underestimated. The work that he did and the other good people there. So everybody who's listened to this, follow the brother on Twitter. I've posted it on there. Let's see, his Twitter is HEAVIDOR. 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 So follow Mr. David Lowe. Tomorrow night we'll be bringing an interview with Mr. Matt McGlone. Yes, indeed, Mr. Matt McGlone. Don't say we don't look after you. This is an Internet Bampot special week. We're talking to the rebels who helped save Celtic. Later on in the week, God willing, we'll be doing interviews with the Bampots, some of the Bampots who helped bring us this brilliant news and help hasten the demise of Old Co Sevco. Let's not underestimate that, the work that the Bampots have done. Many fine people bringing you the up-to-date news, questioning the status quo, questioning the system of oppression that has existed in Scottish football, that has allowed Old Co Sevco to cheat. It's the whole of Scottish football. They've cheated the whole of Scottish football for so long, and good people stepped up to the plate, just the same as the good rebels. So what we're doing here, forget everything about Sevco and the Old Co and the New Co. We're talking Celtic matters here. So that was a good brother, David Lowe. God willing, he's also got a night. If you go on to his Twitter, he's posted there's a night on this Thursday for just 100 people with a special guest and free pizza. 7 o'clock. It's in town. It's on his Twitter. As I say, at HEAVIDOR. Thanks to everybody who joined us tonight. God willing, we'll be back later on. We'll do a live midnight show, midnight 1 o'clock. Do a wee phone out show. Any good brothers want to phone in? We'll chew the fat. God willing, sometime, as I say, between 12, 1, maybe 2 o'clock. We'll do that later on, chew the cud with whoever. We'll put a phone call out there, a phone number out for any daft zombies. If they want to man up instead of being keyboard warriors on the old Twitter, join me in, a special phone in. And then tomorrow, God willing, 6:15, tell 10 to tell 10. Second part of how the rebels won control of paradise to give it back to the fans from the temporary custodians. And God willing, if Fergus McCann, if you're out there, brother Fergus, then come speak to Tommy Gold and Glasgow Radio Online. Would love you to come on. I know you don't want to talk to mainstream media. I've got the same opinion of you about the secret societies. I would love to chew the fat with you if you would want to opine with such a crackpot like myself. I guarantee you, we ain't sellout radio. We ain't Uncle Tom suit-taking radio. We're here bringing you the truth. God willing, seek the truth, reject falsehood, for falsehood is always vanishing. Increase the peace, fight the power. Hail, hail. And I'll speak to you all tomorrow, or tonight. Yes, Stephen Monaghan, the parrot, Cash and Carry FM. Yes, that's the next invention. Glasgow Radio Online it is just now. Once that's run its course, we'll change it. We don't need to hold on to the old cold Glasgow Radio Online. We were radical pacifist online. We metamorphosised into Fangita Radio Online, into Glasgow Radio Online. So once we're getting a chap on the door, then yes, indeed, we'll call it Cash and Carry FM, sponsored by the Parrot. And the catering king, the bar mitzvah king, the Don Curly Wurly of Cash and Carry, Internet Bampot, what is it you're doing there? Cash and I'm getting confused with the Cash and Carry. Internet Bampot, Buffet, Supremo, Mr. Parrot. Right, hail to everybody on the chat board here, hail to everybody on the Twitter, and God willing, speak to you all later on tonight after midnight. We'll do a wee phone in, phone out show, give you a number if you want to give me a call. And God willing, maybe do a lunchtime show again tomorrow. And yes, we'll tweet half an hour. I'll try, but I'll tweet the show half a minute before I go live. Half a minute before I go live tonight. Right, so hail to everybody. And I've nothing to play it on. Did everybody? I done an interview Hugh Keevans earlier on. If anybody didn't catch it, it's on the thing with Hugh Keevans. Phone and spoke to him earlier on. And so I'll let you go just now.
But as far as I'm concerned, the first thing you can do for me is to chuck all your medals and all your caps and all your pots and all your pans into the biggest flipping dustbin you can find. Because you've never won any of them fairly. You've done it all by blooming cheating.
But you'll have to forgive me, as I've been listening to Rangers fans singing how they'd like to wade up to their knees in my blood over the last 50 years. So, ha ha, Rangers, ha ha ha. But
that's the bottom line. The big house must stay open. That's the bottom line. The big house must stay open. That's the bottom line.
Yep, that's it. The big house must stay open. So join me later on, God willing. Hail, hail. Speak to you all soon.